Imagine a world with no police, no government. To us, that sounds like chaos, anarchy. But what if I told you there was an entire world where this wasn't just normal? It was the norm. And for centuries, these worlds thrived, developed, and grew without ever needing a policeman or politician. What's more, their crime rate was lower and their communities stronger. So how did they do it? For centuries, small villages across the globe operated without governments or police. In a world before phones and patrol cars, how did they keep order? How did they stop crime? Or surprisingly, how did they keep their society together? Before 911, before courts and jails, they had no way to fight crime except the system itself. So how did they do it? It comes down to three: social pressure, restorative justice, and elder wisdom. First, social pressure. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever lied? Come on, be honest. If you haven't, you're either a saint or not being honest. Now imagine your entire life like this, every choice under constant scrutiny. That's what life was like in a traditional village. Every single person knew everyone else. There were no strangers. And if a stranger showed up, gossip would travel faster than wildfire, ensuring they stuck out like a sore thumb. Now let's say you slipped up, maybe stole an apple from Mr. Henderson's orchard. You think, he won't notice. But in a world with no police force, Mr. Henderson was also your neighbor, your church member, your kid's classmates, parent. You'd better believe he'd notice. The only way to survive in such a world was to be part of the group, to fit in and be accountable. In fact, being a slacker, a troublemaker, or a cheat was the quickest way to find yourself shunned, alone, and possibly even penniless, without anyone helping you. Your reputation was your currency. Gossip was your judge and jury. And the ultimate punishment was banishment, exile from the only world you knew. So naturally, everyone played nice, right? Well, not exactly. In a world with no police force, dealing with problems required ingenuity and a lot of courage. Imagine you caught your neighbor's son stealing that very same apple. What do? Call the cops? There weren't any yell at him? Maybe. But consider the consequences. You just made an enemy, created tension where there was none before. The best solution? Talk to him. But don't think this was like a casual chat over the fence. This was confrontation. It meant risking your own reputation, possibly even your safety, to call out another person. That's why in such societies, they didn't just have zero crime, they also had zero bystanders. Everyone was involved. Everyone cared. That brings us to point 2, restorative justice. In traditional villages, punishment wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about fixing the damage and moving on. Say John Smith, our apple thief, got away with his crime. His punishment wouldn't be a fine or even jail time, it would be restitution. If he stole an apple, he'd have to return 2. Not because he'd be popular for returning double apples, but because that was the only way to make things right. But what if John went rogue and stole a cow? Again, the punishment wouldn't be higher. It wouldn't be harsher. It would still be restitution, only now for cows. The logic was simple. Stealing a cow caused more damage than stealing apples. So returning 2 was proportional. 4 was more so. This way, criminals weren't shamed or isolated. They were welcomed back into the community once they'd made amends. And that's the key. Their goal wasn't to break people, it was to fix them, both the victim and the criminal. And who decides on the punishments? Elders. Think of them as judges, but without law degrees or political connections. These were respected members of the community, often older, wiser, and most importantly, neutral. They didn't need badges or guns to command respect. They earned it through their age and experience. And since they were well known, they had no incentive to lie or cheat. In fact, their reputation was at stake. Now, these aren't exactly court proceedings we're talking about. There were no lawyers, no appeals. Disputes were settled in hours, not years. A broken vase, a stolen goat, a damaged fence. The elder would decide the compensation, mediate the deal, and ensure both parties stuck to it. Now, that's not to say there weren't consequences. In fact, a lot of those old wives' tales about witchcraft and such are rooted in this practice. If someone broke the social contract, if they harmed someone without making amends, they risked becoming outcasts. But what about when all else fails? When nothing's working and you have no police force? Enter collective survival. Picture this. You need a new barn. Who's going to build it? John, he's busy arguing with the butcher over last week's pork. Jane, she's tending to her sick mother. This isn't a TV show. It's life in a traditional village. You don't wait for someone to build your barn. You pitch in. Every member of the community was responsible not just for themselves, but for each other. And that meant helping neighbors, pitching in during harvest time, and building communal structures. The concept of needing help was almost foreign. If you needed something, you asked and you got it. Because if the community didn't thrive, neither did you. And the threat of that, the knowledge that you could be left to fend for yourself, was the ultimate fear. In fact, some groups took this so far that they had no word for death. Instead, they said someone went missing or someone was no longer with the group. Why? Because death was seen as a natural part of the cycle, but never something to burden others with. If someone died, the community mourned, helped the family, and moved on. It might sound cold, but it was practical. After all, they couldn't afford funerals or lengthy grieving periods. They had to focus on survival. But here's the kicker. This wasn't charity. It wasn't kindness. It was insurance. If you put in now, you'd get out later. And since everyone knew this, no one slacked off. In fact, someone who didn't pull their weight wasn't just mocked or ignored. They were actively ostracized, and this wasn't a polite exclusion. This was a fate worse than death. Because in the end, it wasn't about rules or regulations or even laws. It was about belonging, and the price of non-compliance was steep. So whether you were a gossiping busybody, a cheating farmer, or a lazy teenager, you had to toe the line because in a village without police, without government, you had to rely on the one thing that held everything together, the community. You see, they relied on the power of collective responsibility, of shared accountability. But as much as we mock or joke about these practices, they worked. Crime rates were low, resources were shared, and conflicts were settled. The big question is, why don't we have something similar today? I mean, we do have community watch programs, neighborhood watch programs, but they're more about alerting the authorities than handling things themselves. Sure, there are mediators and arbitrators, but they're hired, they're paid, they're not part of the community. We've traded accountability for anonymity, personal gain for collective good, and we call it progress. But have we? We live in a world where people drive thousands of miles to save a few dollars on goods they don't even need. But when it comes to a leaking roof or a fallen fence, they call up a contractor. We live stream our lives, yet have no problem turning a blind eye to a neighbor in need. We constantly seek validation online, yet struggle to look someone in the eye and tell them they're wrong. We live in a world where 99% of crimes go unreported, where criminals know they can get away with it, where witnesses are too afraid to speak up, and where victims are left with no recourse. We live in a world where we've sacrificed community for convenience, where we've chosen anonymity over accountability, where we've ditched thick, tight-knit communities for loosely connected acquaintances, and we wonder why we need policemen and politicians. The sad truth is, we brought this upon ourselves. As we've scaled to greater heights, we forgot what held us together. But here's the even sadder truth. The blueprint still exists. You can choose accountability over anonymity, community over convenience, and shared responsibility over individual freedom. The only question is, will we?